Testing. All right. Greetings, everybody. I want to say a special thank you to our organizers, and my co-panelist here is Josh Tabish from Progress Canada and David Clement from Consumer Choice Center. I wanted to start off with, here's our slides to set the stage for what we'll talk about. I'm going to introduce a little bit of the International Trade Barrier Index. The Trade Barrier Index looks at how 122 countries use tariffs, non-tariff barriers, services restrictions, and how they facilitate trade. To give you a clear picture of what kinds of trade barriers are out there and how countries are deploying them. Canada is 4th overall, Mexico 49, and the United States 61. The United States is, this is before the Liberation Day tariffs. We'll see that United States has a lot of non-tariff barriers. And this doesn't include the interprovincial tariffs I've been hearing about here in Canada. On tariffs, the United States is 81st, but that's because the United States has a lot of tariff lines. And in Canada, the average tariff rate is pretty low, but in the United States, the average tariff rate before Trump is 2.5%. When you change that to 10%, that moves the United States to last place in the average tariff rate, and the United States overall to 113th. In services, like other high-income countries, the United States and Canada are pretty low, more open to foreign businesses operating in their countries. Canada is a little bit more restrictive on telecom and entertainment services. It's on non-tariff barriers where high-income countries have a lot of these extra restrictions on goods. And the United States is last in this category because it has a huge number of these restrictions on health and safety concerns, a lot of tariff rate quotas on agricultural products. And that's where the United States and Canada have more of their traditional trade disagreements on dairy and lumber and how much goes across the border. On facilitation, the United States looks good here because it has few digital trade restrictions. Unfortunately, it has very few trade agreements compared to other high-income countries. I want to focus on this yellow bar where this is where we see new restrictions popping up is in digital trade restrictions. This component, we look at 7 different parts. In the United States, most countries don't have digital-specific regulations. It's only on the last 40 or so countries where Europe is half of that, has been really pioneering these digital trade restrictions. And then China and some authoritarian Asian countries. Everyone knows 20 years ago, the great Chinese firewall that forced a lot of American platforms to leave. This is kind of what's happening with a network of different digital restrictions popping up in Europe and other countries that are prone to the Brussels effect. In the United States, we have a lot of gig economy restrictions. These are the measures on where Airbnbs can be, how much they can charge, where Ubers can park and carry people. And that's because we have 50 states. In Canada, some of the restrictions we see are this Online Streaming Act, the Online News Act, and the Lawful Access Act, which is a live debate right now. Each of these barriers come with different sorts of restrictions with them. They usually come with a fee or a levy or a tax based on global revenue, which is a very new way to regulate. In Canada, these come with content moderation, which restrict how you can express yourself and where you can learn news from. And my panelists will dive into each of these. But before we go forward, the CEO of Ledger in Brussels made this amazing analogy I can't get away from. It's how you catch wild hogs. They're very skittish, and there's a lot of them, so you can't just hunt them. So you have to bait an area first, and they have to get used to it. And then one week you come back and you build a wall, and the next week you come back and build another wall. And there's a guy in Florida with a YouTube channel that does this. People hire him, and this is a great video. And so I've labeled these doors in this fence, and then one day they close, and you find out You can't get news where you used to get news from. You can't have the latest AI model when you travel to this country. And this has the real implications for productivity and competitiveness. And let's see how this works.
See what happens. Just hit the button. Just hit the button. Oh.
There you go.
Look at them things going everywhere.
So David and Josh are going to tell us how we avoid one day finding out we've been trapped inside a wild hog pen. And welcome, David.
Yeah, thank you. I guess, I'll start with the Online News Act because that has had a really widespread impact beyond just the irritation of not being able to share something on a meta platform. The whole concept for me, actually, the government's argument, and more the industry's argument, the publisher's argument, was that social media platforms are stealing content and they should pay every time somebody clicks on a link, meaning that Meta should pay the publisher. But I think they got the dynamic between social media and publishers wrong. I think they actually got it backwards. Because when I write something for the Globe and I post it on my Facebook and let's say 100 people click on it, well, I have just sent, via the medium of social media, 100 free potential leads to that newspaper. Are they better off because of that dynamic and that relationship? And for the most part, we know that they are. And we know that they are because everything published, for the most part, on any major news platform in the top right or left corner comes with what? A sharing option. I got into it with a very prominent journalist in Canada who called the actions of social media platforms theft. And I asked, well, then why in all of your op-eds do you have an automatic share button to all of the social media platforms? If it was theft, obviously, you wouldn't do that. And so the impact of this, beyond the irritation of not being able to share news, really comes at the local level, is where you see it being the most devastating. Because for a lot of these small outlets, social media was their means to communicate local news to rural populations. And then that was obviously exacerbated when you look at something like wildfire season and how do we get information to people. And not being able to share news coverage or alerts on Facebook with a population that really doesn't have any other means of accessing local relevant news. And so it ended up helping the big publishers, hurting the little guys who, from the government's view, are the ones who matter the most. And, which we'll get into, is a trade irritant. It's something that the U.S. administration has pointed out correctly, that is a trade irritant in negotiations. And so we have an opportunity to repeal a law for our own good, because it's built on, I think, a bad premise. But also we get the added benefit of potentially trying to smooth some of the waters with our greatest trading partner.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Josh Tabish, as you heard earlier. I'm the Senior Director for Canada with Chamber of Progress, a tech industry trade association. So I have a confession to make. This is my first Canada Strong and Free event because I have spent most of my career up to this point working in civil society. And one of the things I learned in civil society was that when it comes to digital policy issues, they are surprisingly nonpartisan. When I was at Open Media many years ago, we had tons of lefty supporters who were concerned about regulating big tech and regulating big telecom, but we also had a lot of right-leaning and libertarian supporters and donors who were very uncomfortable with the idea that the government would have new powers to spy on what they're doing online. And so, I'm here to tell you that in 2026, this dynamic hasn't changed a lot. Bill C-22 is the government's new lawful access legislation, and I think most people in this room would share, share the government's objectives of wanting to make sure that Canadians stay safe from cybercrime and national security threats. I don't think that's controversial. Unfortunately, Bill C-22 just doesn't strike the right balance right now when it comes to safeguarding the privacy and security of consumers. So no matter where you sit on the spectrum, if you care about Canada's sovereignty and you care about national security, I think you really have to take a hard look at this bill and be worried based on how it's currently drafted. The legislation is actually, as we speak, being studied at the National Security Committee, SECU, a few blocks away. There, I think lawmakers are going to hear for the first time in this public meeting some of the concerns related to privacy, security, and civil liberties.
Yeah, and just to build on what you're saying about the security problem, in kind of layman's terms, it's essentially mandating a vulnerability. But when you've mandated that vulnerability, that backdoor, whom could use that against you, right? If we think on the larger geopolitical scale, it's just a flashing green, it becomes a flashing green light for nefarious actors in Russia or China or anywhere else. And so we would have been opening the back door with now, when they hear the objections, knowing that the regimes who interfere in our elections will very possibly use that as a means to invade your privacy or any nefarious thing they could do. And I think that is an important part of the geopolitical context here is if you mandate that backdoor, it will be used by the worst among us.
Yeah, I would add to that it's easy to dismiss these concerns sometimes as hypothetical risks, right? Civil libertarians get up there and say, oh, well, but you know, the powers could be used in this way or that way, right? And people go, but are they going to? Well, these aren't hypothetical risks. We've seen in the US, as recently as in the last year, multiple instances where the types of lawful access capabilities that were inserted into telecom networks by the federal government have been exploited by cyber actors like Salt Typhoon to gain access to US critical infrastructure, to break into FBI wiretap programs. And the bad news I have for the room is that similar types of powers are being proposed in Bill C-22. Just really quickly at a high level, you know, I think the biggest offender is the potential for the bill to weaken encryption. Encryption is a protocol that makes sure your messages and your financial information and your commercial trade secrets stay private and can't be intercepted by third parties. The bill opens the door to weakening encryption that, to David's point, once that back door is added or once that workaround exists, the bad guys are going to find it. And this is made all the more problematic by new powerful frontier AI models that seem to be uniquely good at finding those vulnerabilities. The second issue with the bill is the ability for the government to insert interception capabilities into networks, and similarly, these can be exploited by bad actors. And third, and I think this one maybe is flying under the radar a bit, but there is a power that would allow the government to say cloud service providers, telecom providers, social media platforms have to keep all metadata. And metadata here is not, it's not like the messages you send each other. Metadata is logs about who you talk with and when, your location data. It's very revealing. Metadata can be kept for up to 1 year, just in case law enforcement decides to investigate somebody at some point. And this creates a real honeypot, a really rich trove of information for hackers to try to get access to. So there's a number of problematic issues with the bill, and I'd invite my co-panelists here to jump in if there's anything they want to share.
Well, yeah, I mean, the response that I will often get is, well, if I have nothing to hide, I have nothing to worry about. And that framing always irritates me because I think it should be, do you have anything that could be used against you, then you should be worried. And that doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong, but if you look at, like, if we go back to cell phones and the debate over what's required to access a cell phone, well, there's more in my phone than there is in my home. Banking, all my messages, pictures, social media, you name it. And so that's why something like this bill matters, is because it's going to chip away at some of those safeguards and roll out the red carpet for those bad actors.
So if I were to try to shine, try to find some light here at the end of the tunnel, the government up to this point has been willing to modify the bill. They did modify the powers in Part 1 of the bill prior to reintroducing it as Bill C-22. It was some of you may recall, it was originally introduced as Bill C-2. And there is the parliamentary process or the legislative process rather, that the bill still has to go through. And so for our part at Chamber of Progress, we drafted some written recommendations and associated legislative amendments and shared that with committee members earlier this week. And I hope that the government listens to the concerns of civil libertarians and privacy experts and legal experts who are very worried about what this bill means for the security of our country and the privacy of its citizens.
Thanks for highlighting those issues, guys. It's unfortunate the U.S. can be used as a bad example here. Yeah. I think we need legislation in the states, but you have this legislation right now that can get fixed if you get the right people on it. I want to ask about some other regulations that are up for debate here and around the world. One of those is age verification or online age bans for social media. Is that being talked about here? Do you see trade-offs on these types of age-based?
Yeah, so it is. And I would say it's turned everybody into a hypocrite. And what I mean by that is for conservatives who support it, right? Conservatives have long been the party of parents, and I think rightfully so, and they've carried that banner for a long time. Supporting things like a ban is offloading that parenting to the state, beyond the logistical hurdles, and we'll get into that, of how you actually do that. But then on the progressive side, you have the same members of parliament who support, potentially support a ban, but who also think that 16-year-olds should vote, and don't see the cognitive dissonance in holding those two views. So yeah, it is picking up steam. Manitoba is one example. I know you were recently there, so I'll let you elaborate on how that is actually going to work.
I think that, everyone feels anxious about what kind of effects unfettered access to technology can have on young people. I don't think that's controversial. I am a parent myself and am starting to think about these things more and more. And so I get it. There's a lot of fear out there. And I'm concerned that some of the measures that are being discussed when it comes to social media bans or limiting access to AI chatbots, I'm worried that these make for better politics and better headlines than they do for policy. And so if we take a look at where this has been tried elsewhere in the world, Australia has been the front runner. They introduced a social media ban for youth under 16. I'm pretty sure it's 16. And the e-safety commissioner there has released some data showing 3 or 4 months in what the effectiveness of that ban has been. And it's not a silver bullet. Like it has led to partial reductions, but it's by no means the solution that lawmakers were hoping it would be. Kids are still finding ways online. They're making their face wrinkly. There's tutorials going around for how to wrinkle their faces to get past the age gate sensors and the age estimation cameras. They are doing tricks with their voices. They're doing all sorts of weird stuff to get back online. And so I think that, and regardless of the effectiveness of the policy, we got to think about, the incentives here. If social media platforms don't think young people are on their platforms, what is their incentive to make them safer for them, right? I'm concerned that these bans are not only effective, but they let social media platforms off the hook. So I think there are other solutions we could look to. Canada is one of the only OECD countries that doesn't have a national digital media literacy curriculum. That seems like low-hanging fruit for us to take on. There are also things we can be doing to get the parental controls that exist in platforms into the hands of parents. I think most parents, and look, I get self-conscious talking about this because as a stressed out, overworked parent, I'm always reluctant to say like parents should do more because I am, very tired all of the time and stressed. But I do think there are tools out there that can make a big difference for parents and for families, and there's a lot of companies making big improvements in that space. And so I just worry that bans won't be effective and could really cut kids off from community and ways of expressing themselves that could be very detrimental.
Yeah, I have my daughter's in 2nd grade, and she has a Facebook Kids account, and I have complete control over it. And on her iPad, I have control over that. I know who she's talking to. I know what app she's using. I can imagine if she was older, if she wanted to sneak on the internet, if she didn't have access, she's not going to sneak onto the kids' account. She's going to make a adult account, and you'd have less control.
Yeah, and you point out, that's just what being an active parent is supposed to be, right? It's supposed to be, these are supposed to be basic things, but I can give an anecdote. My daughter is 3.5. Sometimes she wants to watch something. She has an iPad that has interactive educational games and things like that. The easy way around the infinite scroll of YouTube Kids, which is the platform designed for kids, or even something like Netflix, is we can simply just connect it to the internet, download what we approve for her to watch, disconnect it from the internet, and she only has access to those downloads.
But on YouTube Kids, you can also disable the automatic play.
Yep.
And you can also block different channels.
Yep.
And I do that too.
Yep.
Sometimes it's time consuming, but
Parents are also a little split on this. When you look at the polling data, there was I think it was an Abacus poll about a month ago that came out that said, 70% of parents support a social media ban. But if you dig down in the poll results and you see the questions related to who do parents think the primary responsibility it is to keep kids safe online, they overwhelmingly said parents and not government. And so I think what this speaks to is folks out there are desperate for solutions, and I think there are solutions that will be less more effective and less rights infringing than some of what we're seeing with the ban ideas.
Yep.
okay, now there's this big movement for digital sovereignty here and in Europe. And sometimes what that means is for our digital infrastructure to have a lot of content be localized, about like the physical content and sometimes software. Are there trade-offs when you go down this route where you exclude products and suppliers from different countries and try to keep everything national?
So if you talk to, well, let me put this differently. I think there is a lot of concern out there right now about people getting access to our data that we don't want, right? There's a lot of concern about the US using its powers under the Cloud Act or other statutes to gain access to Canadians' data. There's a lot of concerns about where data should be stored and how we can protect it. But I worry that in these conversations, we are often over-indexing on location, which is to say where data is stored. If you read the headlines of or if you read the opinion section of the Globe and Mail, the digital sovereignty folks are very, very preoccupied with location and making sure that we build everything in Canada, store everything in Canada. And I actually, I wouldn't dismiss that impulse. I think it's important to be building up our own domestic digital infrastructure. But the facts of the matter are that that infrastructure doesn't exist today. And so I think what we need to do is, instead of focusing on where data is stored, we need to focus on how data is secured. The good news is that even if you work with US companies, with the big hyperscalers, there are lots of interesting options to help keep your data secure through strong encryption, through contractual arrangements. And for most users out there, and whether that's businesses or consumers or even certain government tasks, this can go a long way to protecting Canadians' data and keeping it safe without having to rebuild the entire technology stack in the country. So again, I think this is yes, we should be shoring up our digital infrastructure. Yes, we should be supporting new startups and making sure that there are Canadian options. And in the meantime, we have to be pragmatic about how we protect our data. And encryption is a really strong way to do that, and I think isn't getting enough discussion or focus and attention in the digital sovereignty discussion.
David, do you have a comment?
Well, no, it's. I think you struck the right balance there, as it's not necessarily the location; it is how it is secured. And so, can you check the security box if it's in Europe or if it's in the United States? That is a fundamentally different question than if it's in China.
And I think there are trade-offs too. I was at an event last night where we were talking about AI adoption for small businesses, and data privacy and data security was a hot topic around the table. And one of the things I tried to remind the room is like, okay, what is the likelihood that the Trump administration wants to use the full powers of the US government to get access to the commercial data of a small business selling soap in downtown Toronto? I think the likelihood of that is fairly low. But what is the likelihood that some cyber criminal hacker for hire group would be happy to infect that business's computer with ransomware or hack into their systems to gain their data to shake them down for money? I think that likelihood is actually considerably higher. And so one of the trade-offs you get when you try to get away from those big American hyperscalers is that often means weaker security, because whatever you think of U.S. tech companies, whatever you think of doing business with them, they're pretty good at security, and you get the benefits of the scale and the threat intelligence that they're using to protect their networks. And so again, I'm not saying don't support Canadian cloud service providers or businesses at all. That's not the point. My point here is just to say that we have to be clear-eyed about the risks, take a risk-based approach, and be pragmatic about the choices we make in the market, because there are trade-offs to not going with the big guys.
I remember when I first constructed the digital component of the Trade Barrier Index, the only place where these kind of content restrictions came up was a few countries had some content had to be stored locally for financial data or health data, and it was a way of giving preferences to local banks over foreign banks. But it sounds like these are going in a lot more areas than that today.
We actually did this in Canada in a couple jurisdictions. The one I'm the most familiar with is BC, because I'm from there. But in BC, they had restrictions that government data had to be stored in Canada on Canadian servers, had to keep staying in Canada. And they actually found it so limiting in terms of how they could deliver services to BC residents, and they found that it was resulting in higher costs, and so they actually unwound that a few years ago to relax that restriction. And so what I'm worried about is that we're at risk of going back to that and embracing those kinds of policies that can limit options for government, increase costs, and come with security consequences.
Talking about going back, there are two big digital trade barriers that Canada nixed, is the Digital Service Tax and the Online Harms Act. ATR and Tholos worked hard with a coalition of other think tanks on digital service taxes explicitly, on how these are a new breed of tax that opens the door for different countries to just steal from the American tax base, but also impair their own consumers. How dead are these in Canada? Do they have a risk of coming back in the next 6 months or a year?
I don't, on the digital service tax, I don't think it's coming back, which is a good thing. It's, again, one of those policies that could be repealed solely for the benefit of Canadians, but it also has the added benefit of getting rid of a trade irritant. And so I don't think that that one's coming back. I'll let you maybe weigh in on on online harms and where things stand there.
You know, to back up to Bill C-22 for a second, I don't know that that will count as a trade irritant in the long run, but it certainly is a file where the U.S. government in the past has brought, has a vested interest in ensuring that encryption stays strong. So when the UK government was pressuring Apple to introduce a backdoor into its services that would allow law enforcement to gain access to encrypted material, Apple pushed back hard on that because the security of their users is very important to them, was the reason they gave, of course. And the US government ended up getting involved, to exercise quite a bit of leverage over the UK government, because they recognized that if encryption is weakened for one of their, darling giant technology companies, that's going to undermine trust in the technology, it's going to undermine trust in US companies, and it's going to hurt their competitive advantage. And so I think there is probably a risk of that happening here, if not elevated to the level of a formal, trade irritant in the language of the USTR. Certainly could bring some pressure from Washington if the Bill C-22 proceeds unamended. So yeah, I would just say I think that's a risk there. Yeah.
Yeah, it was such an interesting dynamic when things like the Online News Act and the Online Streaming Act and the Digital Service Tax were all proposed, because they aren't anti-American in writing per se, but because the tech comes from the U.S., it predominantly impacts U.S. Tech companies. But with almost no foresight, the government at the time was poking the bear of the economy that we were so dependent on, and passing legislation that clearly had negative impacts on a very important industry in the United States. And so the Trade Commission has put out their list of trade irritants. Most of these are on there. They're fairly cut and dry. So the one thing I would like to see is Carney to continue on the path of unwinding these Trudeau-era policies, because it goes back to being a win-win. It's a win for us as Canadians, it's a win for us as consumers, and it's a win for anybody who cares about the greatest trading relationship in the world and maintaining that between Canada and the United States.
It might be a trade irritant, but I think we can all agree that the people who get hurt the most are the consumers.
Yeah, it's
there's so many government databases that get hacked.
Yep.
And I get notices in the mail almost every other month. You got hacked.
Yep.
You want this to be competitive. You want your insurance company to keep trying to get the next level encryption than a standardized encryption. I heard here in Canada, there's a live debate over algorithmic pricing. This is a way that you can get custom pricing when you shop online. Is this? Are there legislative proposals to ban this?
Yeah, there have been. There was a lot of discussion over groceries and food, which the grocers weren't actually doing. And the debate for me was summed up mostly online, where someone would say, I can't believe that a business would sell the same product to different people for a different price. And I kind of put my hand up and was like, yeah, but we've been doing that forever. Seniors discounts, student discounts, rewards points, and those types of things. So it's not new. And as an anecdote, my running shoes were not cheap, and I had poked around the website and looked at the shoe a bunch of times, and eventually I got an email that said, hey, we noticed that you've been looking at this shoe a lot. Would 20% off help? And then I bought the shoes. Am I worse off because I got a better deal? No. And I understand the concerns about the potential for gouging, but as we were talking backstage, you cannot lose discounts in the process, because if you were to hypothetically create a ban that said a product is one price, no matter who it is, no matter who the shopper is, well, yeah, then you lose seniors discounts. Those matter. You lose student discounts. You lose all of those. You lose the ability for a company to entice me to buy the shoes because they could take 20% off the price. Those are all good things. We don't want to lose that in this debate.
Yeah, I mean, look, life is expensive right now. Everything feels expensive. Feels like $20 doesn't go as far as it used to. And so it's unsurprising that politicians and tech critics are calling for bans on algorithmic pricing. And, I don't think there's any issue with banning algorithmic price increases, right? I don't think anybody would like the idea that their personal data is being used to extract a higher price from them, and I think that's a pretty reasonable position. But the risk with this legislation and the risk with these ban proposals is that they are overbroad and, like you said, can capture discounts that consumers rely on to save money. I think there's also a misconception out there, or maybe not a misconception, but a kind of under-discussed point. People say, look, this is about big tech using your data to extract rent, to take as much money as they can from you. And the truth is, in the US, where there's more data on this kind of stuff, 35% of small and medium-sized businesses report using algorithmic pricing tools to help target promotions, reach new customers. For example, they'll recognize that they can't afford to give everybody who comes in the front door of their website 10% off, but they can give 10% off to very select types of consumers that they're hoping to, whose demographics they're hoping to break into. And the problem with these algorithmic pricing bans, as they're often discussed, is that they take away the ability for small businesses to do that. If you ban algorithmic pricing entirely, there are no discounts for small businesses and others to offer, especially when they are trying to compete with much larger firms in a very competitive marketplace. And so I would just say, when we look at the legislation, we have to make sure it's very narrowly tailored, make sure it's focused on increases, make sure it's not hurting the pro-consumer and pro-competition elements of it. Manitoba's bill, which is the first kind of viable bill, comes close to doing this, but there's some problems with it. It still captures, right now it would force annoying push notification disclosures of every single discount that you get offered in an online retail environment. And I don't think consumers will like that. I think they will find that annoying because, like, hey, I just want a deal. Yeah. So anyway, these are the kinds of things we need to watch out for in this space.
And what you highlighted there is, I think, important for small businesses versus bigger companies. It acts as an equalizer. It means that they can compete because the tech makes them competitive away from an ecosystem where the company with the multi-million-dollar marketing budget maybe wins the day just because they can outspend to dwarf the competition. The tech is an equalizer for that small business. It's an equalizer in terms of creating more competitive marketplaces, which is how we ultimately obviously increase choice, but bring down prices in the process.
Yeah, like algorithmic pricing tools used to require entire teams of data scientists and engineers, and now they're available as kind of off-the-shelf tools that can be plugged into your, Shopify e-commerce platform, a proud Canadian company.
I like to accept all the cookies, and then I'll search on Google and then Amazon, and then I'll go on Facebook, and I get targeted and then algorithmic pricing by a lot of innovative and local companies that I never heard of. and that for products that you can't find at the Walmart or Target down the street.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. It opens the door to competitor products that you would otherwise not be exposed to because you're not going to see an ad on TV. You're not going to hear an ad for that on the radio. You're not going to see an ad in a newspaper or a billboard or any of the old traditional methods of advertising. All of a sudden, they're in the game now because the tech has brought them up in a position to compete.
And that kind of targeting is weaker in Europe and other places where there is more restrictions on data and how they process data and where it can flow. We have about a minute left. What is most important in the next 12, 24 months?
What is most important in the next 12 months? Well, I think we got to fix Bill C-22. Maybe there's some recency bias there because I just filed a submission on it and it's being studied right now, but I think we really got to tighten up the provisions on encryption to make sure that encryption stays strong and so that trust in Canada's digital infrastructure isn't undermined. What else would I say? I would say we got to be really careful with how we proceed on social media bans. I don't want Canada to have buyer's remorse when the ban doesn't really work and the platforms have less incentive to make them safe. And I think there are alternatives there. So, I mean, those would be the two I would pick.
And for me, it would be on the trade side, is having a hard look at some of these policies and the potential benefits domestically, but also the potential benefits for it making USMCA renegotiation easier, more streamlined, right? Let's create an ecosystem where the Americans have as little to complain about as possible. That is our best path, especially for the ones we've talked about, where we would all benefit if they were repealed.
Perfect, and that's a mutually beneficial relationship. So we benefit, you benefit, we're good neighbors, and that's it. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Philip, David, and Josh, and to welcome